When two security guards tried to force a black Marine to leave his own son's graduation, nobody expected 6 Navy SEALs to rise from the crowd and freeze the entire gym without saying a single word. What happened next turned a loud ceremony into a moment people would never forget. Ronan Blackwell didn't come to be seen. He came to keep a promise. The parking lot behind West Briar High looked like every small-town Texas high school on a hot May evening. Weathered brick, chain-link fences humming with heat, flags tugging at a stubborn wind. Parents in pressed shirts balanced bouquets. Kids in scuffed sneakers dragged helium balloons across the asphalt. Somewhere near the gym doors, 2 cousins argued about whether the principal would mispronounce their last name. Ronan parked his midnight blue Charger along the back fence, killed the engine, and listened to the clicking metal as it cooled. The car still smelled faintly like citrus cleaner and Elena's perfume, his wife's favorite. She'd been gone for 2 years, and yet some afternoons he swore she was still in the passenger seat, feet on the dash, teasing him about driving too carefully. He smoothed the front of his dress blues out of habit. The uniform carried a weight that had nothing to do with fabric. Polished boots, sharp crease, metals he never liked to talk about. Not because he was trying to make a statement, but because the Marine in him didn't know how to do anything halfway. The black man in him knew how to take up space without apologizing for it. He opened the glove box and pulled a small, worn photograph from a plastic sleeve. Elena cradling their newborn Jace, head full of tight curls, and exactly the same dimple Ronan got when he tried not to smile. A crease ran through Elena's cheek from the number of times he'd folded and unfolded the picture on long nights in places no one should have to sleep. He pressed the photo flat against his palm, then slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. "Promised you," he whispered, "I wouldn't miss it." The walk to the double doors was steady and unhurried, every step an exercise in intention. Inside, the gym was alive. Metal chairs lined up in perfect, squeaky rows across the polished floor. Bleachers already stacked with neighbors who knew everyone's business and pretended they didn't. The air smelled like floor wax and salty popcorn. The sound of chatter rose and fell in waves, brushing past him without ever touching the still place he carried inside. Ronan showed his printed ticket to a volunteer with a clipboard and a nervous smile. The volunteer scanned it, nodded too quickly, and pointed to the 3rd row, left side, family seating. "You're good, sir," he said. "Headset askew." "Appreciate it," Ronan replied, voice even as a level beam. He took his seat. The plastic chair wobbled once, and he adjusted without complaint. On the stage, a banner arced from basketball hoop to basketball hoop. Class of 2024, silver foil letters throwing back the gym lights like small, stubborn stars. At the far end, in a river of black caps and gowns, Jace waited, tall, nervous, one hand worrying the edge of his program. 18 years went by like 4 blinks. Ronan remembered the first time he'd held him, still wearing dusty camis after a flight from Okinawa with 4 days of leave and a lifetime of love he hadn't learned how to say yet. He sat very still. The stillness was not a challenge. It was a practice. Pomp and circumstance crackled through the speakers, and the gym rose as if pulled by one thread. Families tilted phones. A grandfather forgot how to clap in rhythm and did it anyway. Ronan stood with the rest, hand not over his heart, because he didn't need a reminder. The anthem was stitched into the way he kept his back straight when the world tried to curve him. He kept his eyes on the stage, but his mind was in 2 places, here with Jace, and somewhere else, a memory he could ignore but not erase. As the last syllable of the anthem dissolved into the rafters, 2 uniformed men turned into the aisle and began walking toward him. Not police, not faculty, private security. Black polos tucked into cargo pants. Company names stitched on the chest. Myrtle and Pike Protective. Radios on their belts. Earpieces they touched too often. One shorter, barrel-shouldered, shaved head with a jaw that closed like a trap. Trent Pike. The other taller, skinnier, gum-chewing like he had somewhere he'd rather be. Asher Hobbs. Neither looked older than 30. Ronan saw them the way you notice a change in the wind, without looking directly. He didn't flinch. He didn't shift. He let his presence do the talking. Pike stopped beside him, and leaned down just enough that his words wouldn't carry. "Evening, sir. We're going to need you to come with us." Ronan turned his head slowly, like a turret. "Is there a problem?" Hobbs slid a step closer. "This row's for family of graduates only." Ronan reached into his coat and offered the same printed ticket he'd shown at the door. "Third row, left side. Family seating." Pike didn't look at the ticket. "It's full now." "It was full when I sat down," Ronan said. "Who gave the order?" Hobbs's gum slowed. "Look, it's not a big deal. There's space in the back. Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be." Ronan's gaze settled on him, steady, measured, with an old quiet that made younger men reconsider their vocabulary. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be here." The first head swiveled. A mom in a floral dress stopped whispering mid-sentence. Someone in the bleachers raised their phone until it hovered just above shoulder level. Pike straightened, eyes scanning for a supervisor who wasn't there. "Sir, I'm going to ask one more time." "You can ask all evening," Ronan said, lowering his voice, the bass line under the song. "I'm not moving." Hobbs's mouth tilted. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back." There it was. Said like a favor. Meant like a fence. The air shifted. Not colder. Just closer, like the room had leaned in. Pike adjusted his radio without breaking eye contact and muttered something into the mic. Ronan didn't bother to interpret. He had seen men who confused instructions with authority. He had learned the difference, sometimes the loud way. A woman in the next chair, a white grandmother with a pink cardigan and knuckles like folded paper, slanted her body ever so slightly toward Ronan. "Don't you let them move you," she whispered, the soft anger of the truly kind. Ronan tipped his chin a millimeter. He didn't come here for a scene. He came here for a ceremony. The first student's name boomed from the stage, and polite applause rippled across the gym. But the current had changed. Attention unhooked from the podium and drifted to the third row, where a Marine sat like an anchor and 2 guards hovered like weather. "Take it up with the office," Hobbs said, lower now, an attempt at mercy that sounded like a warning. "We got our orders." "You have a name?" Ronan asked, almost conversationally. "Hobbs," he said. "Officer Hobbs." "Your private security," Ronan answered. "Not officers." Pike took a half step closer. "All right. Enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't finish, because the far gym doors whispered open, and a man stood up without standing out. No uniform. No badge. Nothing about him shouted. It was everything about him that did. Broad-shouldered, close-cropped salt and pepper beard, fitted black jacket over a gray shirt. He walked down the center aisle like he owned his balance. Sat 2 rows behind Ronan. Never took his eyes off Pike and Hobbs. Rafe Mercer. They once called him Commander. They now called him by first name in rooms where secrets were never said aloud. Across the gym, another man rose from the bleachers and drifted down the edge to sit near the end of the row. Tattoo peeking from under his sleeve, face carved out of quiet. Diego Diggs Cruz. Then a third, tall, freckled. Nothing remarkable until you noticed he never once scanned the room twice. Noah Kincaid. A fourth slid in like a shadow, choosing where to rest. Tyrell Boone. A fifth, calm, compact, gaze that sat on a person and weighed truth without touching it. Eli Vargas. A sixth, stubble, Slavic cheekbones, posture that said he was always 3 steps from the door and knew exactly how to use each one. Marek Petrov. None of them spoke. None of them looked at each other. But the room changed the way storm air changes, pressure you feel in your ribs before you hear thunder. Ronan did not turn around. He didn't have to. He knew the way those men breathed when the world narrowed. He knew the way they held their jaws when wrong tried to look right. He had carried 2 of them in heat, so bright it burned yesterday out of the sky. Pike felt it too, something he couldn't name, the way prey feels the line between curiosity and caution. He glanced toward the front for backup and got nothing but the principal paging through a program, like it might teach her how to stop a tide. "Sir," Pike said louder, words now scaffolding for pride. "Last warning." Ronan didn't blink. To do what exactly? To stop disrupting the event. Move to the back. "You're the only disruption in this room," Ronan said, Pike's nostrils flared. The sentence that fell out next didn't sound like policy. It sounded like habit. You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everyone else? This is a high school, not your base. Silence. Not the gentle kind. The kind that pulls sound out of a place like a plug. A little girl stopped swinging her feet. A dad forgot to put his phone down. Even Hobbs shifted, the gum doing slow circles of regret. Rafe Mercer stood. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't announce who he was. He just stepped into the aisle with the sort of gravity that makes lesser men check their posture. "Is there a reason?" he said, calm as morning. "You're harassing this man?" Pike turned his shoulder like a shield. "Sir, sit back down. We've got this under control." Rafe's eyebrows didn't move. "No, son. You don't." Diego Cruz unfolded to his feet across the gym. Noah Kincaid's knuckles rested on the seat in front of him as he rose without hurry. Tyrell Boone stood as if answering a roll call that had been echoing for 15 years. Eli Vargas leaned forward once and came up like the last square of a puzzle locking into place. Merrick Petrov didn't so much stand as the room noticed. He had always been standing. 6 men up. No words needed. A current ran from the stage to the rafters, buzzing through every person who knew instinct without ever having trained it. Something significant had just been said without a sound. "Walk away," Rafe said, voice lower now, not for secrecy but for certainty. "Or you'll wish this was just your worst day at work." Hobbs swallowed. He saw it. The balance of the room tilting with math he couldn't do on paper. "Trent, man, let's back off." Pride is a poor negotiator. Pike hovered. His hand drifted to the front of his belt, not to a weapon, but near enough to suggest a shape. Rafe didn't move. The other 5 didn't flinch. At the end of the 3rd row, a school board member tugged the principal's sleeve. The assistant principal, a woman with a walkie on her hip and the look of someone who had talked down 3 fights in a hallway that week, started toward them, speaking into her mic with urgency coded in professional politeness. Ronan finally turned, not to the guards, but to Rafe. The smallest nod. Not gratitude. Recognition. "Brother." Rafe's jaw softened a fraction, then reset like a door with a heavier lock. "Don't mistake silence for weakness," he told Pike. Quiet enough to be a whisper, clear enough to be a creed. The principal reached them with a soft rush of deodorant and determination. Her voice didn't carry past the front row, but it came armed with policy, legal counsel, and the terrifying knowledge of how quickly a small town can trend online. Whatever she said landed. Hobbs took one step back, then another. Pike hesitated, heat climbing his neck, jaw working against a decision that already made itself. He retreated. They both did. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. Rafe sat. The 5 followed. The air held the shape they had cut into it. And up near the line of graduates, Jace Blackwell watched all of it. He had tried to whisper jokes with the girl in front of him to keep from thinking about missteps on the stage stairs, or the way his cap had to ride awkwardly on top of the curls his dad always said to let win. But after the anthem, his focus tunneled to 3rd row, left side. He'd seen the 2 guards moving as if gravity pulled them toward the wrong thing. He saw not just his father's uniform. He saw the way his father sat, still rooted, a flagpole in a storm that refused to crack. And then strangers, no, not strangers, stood for him. Something tightened in Jace's chest, and then loosened again, so quickly it made his eyes sting. He blinked it back, because he wouldn't turn this day into salt. He would not. But the truth held. Whatever story he told himself about who his father was, it had just gotten bigger. Names were called. People clapped harder, like volume might erase discomfort. It didn't, but it did coat the moment long enough for breath to return to normal pace. Ronan's eyes never left the stage. He clapped for some names, and not for others, not to be rude, but because his hands weren't connected to his ears anymore. They were connected to the moment he had driven 8 hours to purchase, with time he could never buy back. His son crossing a line that meant everything and nothing, all at once. 3 students in front of Jace went. 2. 1. The announcer cleared her throat, glanced at the card like it needed courage, and said with weight that made the letters sound taller than they were. Jace Elijah Blackwell. Silence cracked like ice. Then the gym erupted. but not wild, not messy, deliberate. The 6 men who had sat back down rose again in their own way, by lifting both hands to clap in perfect, resounding unison. No whistles, no shouts, just a rhythm that said, "We remember what you carry. We see who carried you." The frequency of it rearranged the air. It wasn't a salute. It was older than that. Jace walked the stage with his head level, and his chin not quite as high as the pride in his chest. He took the diploma, shook the principal's hand, and turned barely enough to find what he was searching for. His father didn't stand. He didn't wave. He didn't mouth, "That's my boy," for the camera. He smiled. Small. Certain. Jace answered with a nod that felt like a promise landing on both of their shoulders at the same time. He stepped off the stage to thunder that had nothing to do with noise. After that, the names continued, but the room had changed. Every student carried a tiny piece of a moment that wasn't about them, and somehow still was. You can borrow courage you didn't earn if you watch it closely enough. 20 minutes later, the last name was called, caps went up, and the gym became a flurry. Hug clusters, squeaking sneakers, confetti that wasn't approved by the custodial staff. Phones bloomed in every direction. Teachers tried to herd seniors, like cats who suddenly learned they all had legs. Ronan didn't move until the crush loosened. Rafe approached with the economy of someone who wastes neither words nor steps. He stopped at the end of the row and waited until Ronan looked at him. "You all right?" Rafe asked. Ronan nodded once. "Been through worse. Shouldn't have had to be through that," Rafe said. "No," Ronan agreed. "But I didn't come here to teach a lesson. I came here to watch my son walk." Diego, Noah, Tyrell, Eli, and Merrick drifted closer, a constellation that knew how to orbit without colliding. "We kept it low-key," Diego said, voice like gravel that learned to be gentle, until low-key stopped working. Ronan's mouth tilted. "You did exactly what needed doing. Same as always." They stood there a moment, 6 men and a Marine making a quiet circle that said more than speeches say on their best day. Then they stepped aside. Jace waited near the flagpole, gown half unzipped, honor cords tangled because that's what cords do. He was in the middle of a sentence with his best friend when he saw his father cut through the noise, like a line through static. The words disappeared from his mouth, and even his friend understood enough to clap him on the shoulder and back away with a grin that said go. They met halfway. "You okay?" Jace asked first, because sometimes love is a question you already know the answer to. Ronan nodded. "You." A breath that wanted to be a laugh and a sob at the same time slipped out of Jace. "Yeah. They tried to move you," he said, and there was steel under those words that wasn't there yesterday. "I know. I was gonna walk off that stage, Dad. I mean it. I was 2 seconds. Ronan's hand landed on his shoulder, a weight that steadied without binding. "And that's why you didn't." Jace blinked. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it. And because you handled your moment. You didn't let anyone steal what you earned." Jace's throat worked. He glanced past his father at the men, who were keeping their distance, like pros who know when their scene is over. "Who are they?" he asked, reverent without trying. Ronan looked back too. 6 men pretending to be part of the background and failing because their type of quiet always draws the eye. "Men I bled with," he said simply. "Men who don't forget." Jace nodded like he was thinking of a new word he didn't know how to spell yet, but would never mispronounce again. It was, I don't know, powerful. "It was necessary," Ronan said. "Sometimes silence speaks for you. Sometimes you let it." They stood shoulder to shoulder for a while, father and son framed by a world that had suddenly learned how to look. Across the lot, Rafe lifted 2 fingers by his thigh, barely a gesture. Ronan answered with the same. No flourish, no theater, the kind of respect that doesn't need the room to applaud. The sun slid down the backboard and spilled across the asphalt. The ceremony dissolved into 100 small celebrations. They gave the school their gym back and took their lesson with them. But there was one more moment still queued for them, one that would braid the day into something neither could untie. They reached the charger. Jace ran a finger along a tiny scratch near the passenger handle. "She would have made me retake every photo until my smile looked right," he said, and the name he didn't say hung there between them in a way that made tears an option and not a requirement. She would have yelled the loudest, Ronan answered, the dimple betraying him. They got in. The doors closed, and the world turned down to a hush that felt like a church that didn't need pews. Jace turned in his seat. Why didn't you say anything back there? You just Saturday. Ronan tapped the steering wheel once, like knocking on wood to remind the tree it's still alive. Because I don't have to stand up for who I am. And I don't have to raise my voice to be heard. Jace looked out at the thinning crowd. They disrespected you. In front of everybody. Yes, Ronan said. And everybody saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men who had every reason to be somewhere else stand up. Not because I asked, but because they understood the moment. Sometimes the story you need told isn't yours to tell. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the photo. Elena and baby Jace. Time's fingerprints tucked into the bend. I carried this through deployments and through grief. I carried it into rooms where the air weighed more than the furniture. Not because paper makes you strong, because memories tell you what's worth fighting for. Jace's voice found a lower register he didn't know he owned. You always knew who had your back. I didn't need to know, Ronan said. I needed to have faith. Real ones don't disappear when things get uncomfortable. They show up, and if showing up is all they can do, they stand. Outside, the 6 men moved like the tide. No timetable, just pattern. Rafe paused by his truck and looked over. Ronan gave the smallest nod. Account settled. Debts none of them kept score on had zeroed again. Jace leaned back, a grin sneaking onto his face, like mischief, finally remembered where it lived. So what now? Now, Ronan said, turning the key and letting the engine clear its throat. We eat. Your pick. Waffle House, Jace said without shame. Of course, Ronan laughed. They pulled out as the last of the streamers gave up and lay down on the floor of a gym that would be mopped tonight by a man who would mutter to himself about glitter and teenagers and still smile thinking about the part where a whole room learned something at once. The town would talk, because small towns do. Some would say the guards meant well and read their notes wrong. Others would say they saw malice in the way one man said back. Most would put their thoughts into the simpler language of right and wrong, because that's the only dialect that matters when your heart has seconds to decide how to behave. The video would surface online, the kind of shaky horizontal footage that shakes belief and steadies faith in equal measure. The comments would do what comments do, burn, bless, and break. But for everyone who was there would always be a detail the camera couldn't catch. The way the air grew dense when 6 men stood like a single intention. How quiet can be an earthquake if you've ever lived underground? They drove the first mile in silence, the good kind, the kind that stitches 2 people together across a seam they didn't realize until that day needed mending. Jace reached forward and turned the radio down even lower, as if anything louder would bruise the thing they were carrying between them. Dad, he said finally. When I was little, I thought being a man was like volume. How loud you could be. How big you could look. He swallowed. Today it felt like, I don't know, weight. Like what you can hold without dropping your piece. Ronan didn't look at him, because some truths are easier to say when you're both staring straight ahead. That's the work, he said. Not looking for a fight. Being too hard to move to need one. Were you scared? Sometimes. Today? No. He smiled without showing teeth. I had company. Jace stared out the window at the pinking sky, at the water tower that used to look like a spaceship to him when he was 7. You gonna tell me the stories now? Some of them, Ronan said. The true parts. The necessary parts. And the ones your mother would tell better if she were here. They reached a red light on the edge of town where a sonic sign flickered, and a kid in a paper hat leaned on a counter he had just wiped. The light turned green. The charger rolled forward. And then, without warning, without theatrics, Ronan's mind pulled him backward like a tide grabs a careless ankle. Kandahar, 15 years earlier. Sun like a blade. Sand like breath you could not swallow. A convoy breaks wrong. A flash. A violent lift. The world turning over and over until the up is a rumor. Ronan's ears rang. He did the math of who was breathing, who was silent, who was in between. through smoke curls and the kind of dust that erases God. He saw 6 men pinned behind a burning vehicle, one trying to pull another, while a third bled a small river into his boot. Rafe's leg was hit. Diego had a crease in his scalp that made his eyebrow look like a comma. Noah yelled without volume because shock steals thunder. Tyrell's hands were steady on a tourniquet. Eli counted breaths he could fix. Merrick said nothing because he'd been born understanding how quiet keeps secrets alive. Ronan didn't ask permission from the sky. He sprinted. Not because he was braver, because he had trained his fear to wait its turn. He slid into cover, barked 3 instructions that sounded like home to men who had forgotten where that was, and lifted a piece of hood that should have made a forklift sweat. He moved a leg that belonged to a man who would someday clap at a high school graduation and look like he was holding the roof up with sound. They crawled. They carried. They did arithmetic with lives and refused to round down. When the firing stopped, there were no speeches. There were counts. There were names answered like prayers. And there was a dead Rafe decided that day he would never treat like a weight. He would treat it like a direction. Back in the present, the road hummed under their wheels. Ronan blinked, and the memory folded itself into the pocket, where he kept things he refused to forget and would no longer let haunt him. Jace stared straight ahead, thinking his own thoughts, learning how to file them. "You know," he said, breaking the reverie, "I was ready to set the mic on fire if they mispronounced our last name. It's not that hard." Ronan laughed. "I've heard it turned into a whole different family before." They pulled into the Waffle House, the one with the missing F that turned the sign into Waffle HOUE and somehow made it feel more honest. The waitress with a beehive and mercy in her eyes poured coffee. She didn't ask if he wanted, and slid a laminated menu toward Jace, whose hand still shook like adrenaline, had found one last room in his body to clean. They ordered too much. They ate like men who had licked salt off their upper lips and called it a meal in other climates. They told enough stories to build a small bridge and left enough untold to make the bridge worth crossing again later. On the drive home, Jace dozed. Ronan drove with one hand, old habit, steering with strength and small adjustments. When they reached the dark street, where their porch light clicked on every night at 7 because Elena said it that way, and he had refused to change the timer, Jace stirred. "You know, Dad," he said, "there's this thing my coach says. Don't swing at everything that moves. Be the strike zone." I never knew what he meant. And now I think he'd like you. Ronan smiled into the windshield. "I like him already." They parked. The night held its breath the way towns do on the other side of big days. Jace reached for the door handle, then stopped. "One more thing," he said, almost shy. "I'm keeping my last name. When I get married, when I have kids, I'm keeping it. They're keeping it. The whole world can learn how to say Blackwell." Ronan didn't pretend he hadn't just gotten punched in the sternum by love. He nodded, once. The way men nod when they accept awards only the heart can hand out. "Good," he said. "Make them say it right." They went inside. On the kitchen counter sat a vase with 3 white lilies that had somehow outlived the instructions on the back of the seed packet. A sticky note in Elena's handwriting. One he kept taped to the inside of a cupboard and moved to the counter on days that mattered. Said only, "Take pictures. You never regret having too many." He had taken 5 before the ceremony and would take 5 more before bed. He would send them to a group chat with a name only those 6 men would understand. The 3 dots would appear. The responses would be simple. "Proud of the kid. Proud of all 3 of you. We still move when you don't." That night, in a small house on a street where dogs announce raccoons like they're breaking news, Jace slept with his diploma on the nightstand in peace under his ribs. Ronan sat at the edge of his own bed, uniform jacket folded with the same precision he used to fold parachutes in a different life. He took out the photograph and flattened the crease again. "Promised you," he told Elena, the kind of whisper that knows how to travel. Kept it. He set the picture beside the lamp. Out in the driveway, the charger ticked as it cooled. The porch light blinked off on its timer, and the house exhaled the way homes do when both of their favorite men make it back safe. People who'd been in the gym would tell the story for years. how 2 guards tried to push a black Marine out of family seating, and how 6 Navy SEALs rose like a wall built out of silence. Some would get the details wrong. Most would get the lesson right. Strength isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the presence that cannot be moved. And if this story moved you, even a little, share it with someone who needs to remember that. Because some days, the whole world feels like an aisle where someone is telling you to go to the back. On those days, may you have the courage to sit still. And may you be blessed with a room full of people who know when to stand.